Testing, testing. We all ready here? So welcome to the nation building educational session. This is the first of many. I'd like to introduce Goldie Larson here. She's going to start things off with a prayer, and then we'll get started with the introductions and all that.
Hello, bonjour. I'd just like to say miigwech for this honor and for this tobacco, and I would like to say thank you for this wonderful breakfast, and I'd like to say miigwech to the Creator for this wonderful life and for Waswagating here, this beautiful place where we live, in the center of the universe. Asema, Kaminiku, Chipagos, Gagosian, Anishinaabe Kwe, Anishinaabe Ineni, Oma Aki. I'd like to say that I appreciate the people who are working with this nation building workshop, and I know that they're striving to get more people in this community to come, so I say miigwech for those of you who have come here, and a special miigwech to our council people who are here, Betty Bouvin, Tom Olson, Alice, and Brooks. Miigwech to you for all your hard work to help this this community to become a better place for our people. I guess I'd like to also say thank you to the people who have prepared this food for us this morning, and wish you all a good day, and hopefully we can open our ears and our hearts to our speaker. We have a wonderful lady here from Fond du Lac Reserve, and we're all anxious to hear her. So miigwech for her coming over here to spend the morning with us. So miigwech.
So before we get started, I just want to introduce Karen. This is Karen Diver from the Fond du Lac Band. We'll mention her. Oops.
Gonna use a different one.
Maybe that one is a little too close.
I just turned it off. Well, actually, I don't need that. Karen's, she's the chairperson, or you're currently a chairperson, right?
Yes.
Yeah, she's the chairperson for the Fond du Lac Band. She's had some pretty good experiences and ups and downs experiences with the membership, citizenship, blood quantum, all that stuff to do with their constitution over there. So she's just going to share some of her experiences with all that. My name's Mike W. Young, for those of you who don't know. Most of you do know, but I'm working as a facilitator for the nation building project. So what we've been doing is trying to set up some community sessions to get people on the same page, get people educated about all this big movement we're making here to, address constitutional reform and things like membership or the judiciary body, or just things in general like amendments, streamline the process. So, Karen, if you want to introduce yourself, or if you're ready, I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
You think I need it?
I think so.
All right.
There's some people in the back, not have people here as well as us.
All right.
Not bad here.
That's cool. Nice and short. Is that better? Better? Yeah? Yeah, okay, cool. So I'm Karen Diver. I am the chairwoman of the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa. Your relations over in Minnesota. I have been the chairwoman for just a little over 7.5 years now. I'm in my third term. I finished a partial term first and then got reelected twice. So I have 2 more years to go. Then I'll have to think about this all again. Prior to that, I worked as the Director of Special Projects, which was a tribal administration position that was kind of multi-purpose. I did a lot of managerial activities in different departments and program development. And I characterized it to your chairman as every time our reservation business committee said, that sucks, somebody should do something about it, it ended up being a special project. So, but got to do a lot of problem solving and got to know a real breadth of the reservation. So that was fun. Prior to that, I spent 12 years in the nonprofit sector working for a social justice group in Duluth. It was a YWCA, so got to work on everything from housing development and operation to girls programs, after-school programs, anti-poverty initiatives, anti-racism initiatives. In other words, all of those things that tribal people are generally at the bottom of the ladder on. I got to be a good advocate. About 80% of the clients at the YWCA were native in Duluth, and so assisted our own community, but from a different sector. Before that, I was in the economic development field for a few years, working for a governmental entity. It was actually the governing board that was first put into place when the Fond du Lac Casino was still in partnership with the city of Duluth. I didn't know that one was going to come back and haunt me 20 years later, but, or haunt them maybe. So my undergraduate degree is from the University of Minnesota, Duluth, in economics. My graduate degree is from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. I went there as a Bush Foundation Leadership Fellow. Bush Foundation not related to the President Bush or not, because that probably wouldn't have been a good fit with all of that. One of the reasons, though, I was interested in studying at the Kennedy School is because that was the home to the Harvard Project on American Indian Economic Development. And they study what is best practices in Indian country in terms of governance and economic development. And I knew at that point that I was thinking about going back and working for the tribe and taking my professional knowledge. I thought it would be helpful to some of the things that the home community was experiencing. And I wanted to invest in my own kind of academic knowledge to make sure the things that I saw were things that were really going to be useful. And one of the things I came across when I was there was an initiative of theirs looking at constitutional reform. And it was still in the studies phases, and they had a manuscript ready for a book, but it hadn't been published yet. So I weaseled my way into an unpublished manuscript and said, can I take that home? Because we need some of that. And what I liked about the Harvard Project was really that they had credibility on the ground with tribal communities. They didn't go in and try to fix them, but they took the time to learn what their needs were and helped where they could, but didn't tell them how they needed to do it. So it wasn't, the great white father coming from one of these institutions and, uh-oh, I'm in trouble now, she came to keep an eye on me. She's smiling now so far. Oh, sorry. So I like that about them, that they had credibility with tribes and kind of what normal people would call cultural competency, right? They didn't try to tell them how to do it, but they provided advice and guidance. So I had this little manuscript, and I came back home, and we started working in our community on constitutional reform. Citizen-led, sanctioned by the council at the time. And it was the biggest hot mess of a process I had ever seen in my life. I should probably do some disclaimer at this point that I have no magic answers for you, but I'd like to share a little bit about what I've seen happen in our community and with the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, so that if there's something that you can learn from it that helps you along the way, I would love to be able to tell you, here's the perfect way you do it, but for every community it's going to be different. So if any of these kind of observations are helpful to you, then I hope that you'll feel that your time was well spent. So we started this constitutional reform effort. One of the first things that I think went wrong with it is people got hung up on enrollment. We're a per capita tribe. We do $400 a month in our per capita. Doesn't make you rich, but it's also a nice chunk of change. You know, it's replaced public assistance for some folks. If you're a couple, that's $800 a month. You might be able to make it if you're in subsidized housing and have other supports, program supports. But it quickly devolved into, you had people at the table who perhaps had grandchildren or great-grandchildren who weren't enrollable under the 1/4 blood quantum, and they wanted access for their children. Then you had a whole group of other people who were motivated, saying, but if we get too big, then we won't have per capita anymore. So the discussion ended up becoming around access to resources rather than identity, self-determination, culture, historical knowledge, connection to community. So I think that was one of the pitfalls, is that we didn't take that time to frame in the beginning, who are we? And what do we want to look like long term? What are our values? How will this Constitution, specifically around enrollment, are there other things we should be considering? Residency, should you at least be able to say your own name in the language? I am not making a judgment on that, and I probably should also do this disclaimer. In talking about Constitution, I am merely one individual, because I will only have one vote, just like all of my citizens. But as chairwoman, I do have some obligation to help with the process, right? And to build some understanding about what we're trying to do. But when push comes to shove and there's something to put on the table, I'm no better, no worse than every other voter that will show up and cast a ballot. So I look at my role as being a facilitator. That being said, the enrollment discussion is something that's huge, and it started overshadowing any chance of talking about the actual governance structure. We don't have an independent judiciary, we don't have really a legislative body, although our reservation tribal council is supposed to act like that. How they function actually is almost like a board of managers. And even though we have this set of bylaws that define some roles and responsibility, it gets a little muddy, right? We are also hampered by the fact that, and this is different, I think, for us than you, is that our Constitution is actually held by the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, which is 6 bands in Minnesota: Mille Lacs, White Earth, Beach Lake, Fond du Lac, Grand Portage, and Bois Forte. And it's a little scary to do constitutional efforts because White Earth and Mille Lacs are just so much larger than Fond du Lac and the other 3 bands, that when we've tried to do smaller pieces of constitutional reform, their will gets imposed on ours. They're the big gorilla in the room because they just have too many voters. Example, a few years back, probably about 15 years ago, they wanted to do a constitutional amendment to ban felons from office. Doesn't matter what kind of felony, just all felons.
Let me switch you up here. It's getting temperamental.
Yeah, it is. I move around too much too. Hard to talk with your hands behind one of these.
Thank you. Sorry.
No, it's not. How's that? Still hear me? Okay, cool. Personally, I cast my vote against that amendment because I know that back in the day, my dad's generation, there were felons called driving while they. Do you know what I mean? One guy actually broke into a vending machine at a golf course, stole chips. I mean, he was all shwaby, but he got charged with a felony because he had a screwdriver, which made it burglary tools. So really, should he be banned from office? So there was no way to differentiate between that guy who did something dumb while he was under the influence back in the days when he was struggling with chemical dependency, and the people that might have actually done something really kind of heinous, like murder. So I thought the voters should decide, because being a felon as a Native American man of a certain generation was quite common. And that doesn't mean they hadn't had a 30 or 40 year good life since then. when they found sobriety and made life changes, right? So I personally voted against it. Neither here nor there, right? Because everybody had their vote. Fond du Lac as a whole, as a band, voted it down. We all felt similarly, and in overwhelming numbers. Leech Lake and White Earth, who were really motivated by some current individuals in office, overwhelmingly approved it. Therefore, now it applies to the people of Fond du Lac. That's a part of our worry with constitutional reform is how do we implement a process that's talked about enough amongst the entire 6 of us so that when an initiative comes forward, there's enough voter education to talk about the kind of implications of our actions. So anyway, so we were in the middle of constitution reform and you know, I said, well, let's start at the other end of the Constitution. If the first part talks about enrollment and we can't seem to find a consensus, can we move on to some pieces perhaps where we can find some common ground? You know, whether it's on separation of powers, whether it's on the governance structure, or let's have a conversation about whether or not we actually want to be a part of the Minnesota Chippewa tribe anymore. And we didn't get anywhere with it because it kept coming down to resources and access to service and to blood quantum. So I guess if there's any piece of advice there is, if you want to move parts of your constitution forward, it might be worth having some conversation with your community about what are those issues that seem to be troubling you most, and perhaps taking some of the low-hanging fruit first and get people used to the idea of making some of those changes in areas that might not be as contentious, so you can at least learn how to talk to one another and disagree and have those conversations and then learn how to move forward. But we never got past the enrollment discussion on that piece. So then time goes on and the spot opens for the chair spot, and it's only $5 to run for office. So so I put down my $5, and it actually worked, and now I was like, oh crap, right? But I had these things that I wanted to, he's laughing at me, but it was kind of like, oh crap, because I didn't think they would hurt. I wasn't born and raised on the reservation, and generally people are real proud of that. You know, I was born and raised, I was a relocation kid. You know, my education was seen as a deficit to some. I'm kind of fair-skinned, some people don't like that. And I'm a woman, we had never had a woman. So it's one thing to have one of those, or maybe 2, but to have all 4, it seemed like the kiss of death. But it worked. But now I'm in office, and I only have a 1.5-year term, and I got a bit challenged by some of the community members of, don't make changes too quick, because you have to run again in a 1.5 years. And that bothered me, because it was like saying I should play a game and not truly try to lead or do anything that could make things better, because I should be worried more about votes than governing. I looked at it that if I only had a 1.5 years, how can I get as much done as possible so that I could prove to people that I was willing to try some tough stuff and be hopefully viewed as a leader in the community worthy of the position. The very first meeting I disclosed Reservation Business Committee salaries when I was asked, because I think people should know I'm a public servant. People thought that, of course, there's always going to be people who think you make too much money and people who think it's not worth it no matter what you get paid. But regardless of that, I'm a public servant and you should know what our salaries are. But I also committed at my very first public meeting to say, if this isn't something you're happy with, then we'll do a salary study and we'll have the citizens decide it. And so we developed a salary commission made up of our tribal members and had them work on what they think is appropriate, and they also put some constraints on it. So this young gentleman says, do you have a speaker's fee? And I said, no. Well, a part of it is I'm prohibited under our compensation policy from accepting any honoraria. So that makes me like a really cheap speaker. People insist I just turn it back in, but part of it is we want to be transparent about what the sources of income are to our tribal council members. So everything we may get gets turned back in. And we have pay grades and steps increases, and it's tied to cost of living for Social Security index. And so at any given point, you can pick out where our compensation plan and know exactly where each of us are. That was a really important step, just because it showed that governance, you don't abdicate your right as citizens just because you cast your vote for one of your elected officials. And what I've always wanted was an engaged citizenry. So that's a part of what motivated me to come here today is if there's anybody who wants to talk about being involved in their government, I think that that's who you elect is only as good as the people that stand behind them and are willing to support them and guide them. And then too often, we're willing to tell our elected officials where we're unhappy with them, but we're not always as willing to say where we're happy and supportive. That's just the nature of our communities, right? I get my chops busted all the time, and about once every few months, someone will send me a thank you note, and I almost kind of sit in my desk and rub it a little bit, trying to pick up some good vibes off of it. That was one thing that we did was a public compensation committee. The second thing we worked on was a code of ethics. There's not much I can do necessarily about changing the Constitution as a singular individual, but we could have our community work on a code of ethics. So we used a citizen committee to develop a code of ethics and a process for managing when complaints are made. One of the things that I learned when I was at Kennedy School and looking at all the different tribes across the country are, there are some tribes that don't have a constitution at all. There's nothing in writing. And guess what? They function every day and they do just fine. What I learned from the code of ethics is that it really doesn't necessarily matter what you put on paper, because if people do not have pure intentions, they will take good intentions and make the very worst out of it. We've been going through a tad bit of political turmoil here, some turnover on our council and kind of some factionalism in our community. I got hit with like 16 code of ethics violations. My coworker got 15 and my other coworker got 14. We called them the I-8, the tribal council code of ethics violations. I wasn't necessarily personally worried because I actually go to bed every night feeling good about the decisions I make, and I recognize them for what they were. And it was an attempt to undermine the current reservation business committee and to manipulate a good thing, the code of ethics, and use it as a political tool rather than an accountability tool. And what we learned from that was that people will do that. And maybe I was a bit too much of a Pollyanna because, we're practicing good government and we have a code of ethics. It never even dawned on me that someone would want to use that for something that wasn't good. I thought it was a good way to say, we don't like your behavior. You are not representing us in a way that we find ethical, and not necessarily kick you out of office. It depends upon the severity, right? I thought it would be like a governmental timeout. You're going beyond the role that we expect in a way that's not good, and this is our way as a community to tell you, get your act together. It took 5 months of every spare moment we had to review these code of ethics because we really didn't realize how manipulated it could be. Nothing came about all of it. Out of all of the 40-some charges against me and my coworkers, even the person who started it had to admit that there wasn't anything there that was wrong after he was confronted by facts. But in the meantime, though, in order to get to that point, we had to scour through minutes and contracts and just this whole institutional, the pack of paper we were looking through was like this to prove their allegations weren't true or were taken out of context or whatever the case may be. At that point, we ended up suspending the code of ethics for a time being because it was really in danger of shutting down the day-to-day operations of tribal government. That 5 months we spent working on those dozens and dozens of complaints complaints, I was not a good leader, not able to be a good leader. I was not able to govern the way I needed to, and I was not able to look proactively. I could only look at that sheet of paper in front of me and go to meetings and try to defend actions that were taken over years. So what I learned from that your best of intentions, you have to look really critically at the words on the paper and the processes that you develop, because people who aren't motivated by good reasons will manipulate what is there as a tool to undermine your governance. And you don't want to give people who are not motivated by the true good of your community more tools to take the time and attention off the good of the whole. That's what my job is, the good of the whole over the good of the few, which means on any given day, I might make you unhappy, but then maybe 2 weeks from now, you'll be happy again, but by then I've ticked him off over there. That's the nature of what this job is. It's the good of the whole. It's kind of like having 12 kids, right? That's a lot like being a head of tribal government. I have to look after all of you equally, and sometimes that means doing things that you don't like. But hopefully understand in the long run, right? The code of ethics to me and governance structure is about creating an environment where, right or wrong, you have a way to make decisions and move forward. I've made decisions in office that in hindsight, I got it wrong. I got it wrong. But to be able to stand in front of my own community and say, I thought that would fix a problem, and I think that solution wasn't correct. So we've learned that lesson. We're going to try plan B now. And we have to have permission to do that without everything being a fight and being hateful. So when you start putting things in writing, you have to look at it and say, how will people who are not good intentioned look at these words and these processes we're setting up, and is it a way to manipulate what's there? What will probably end up happening is, in this case, and I guess I don't know, the citizens will decide this, but one of the things I identified as a gap in that process is that every allegation needed to be investigated. Well, we didn't define investigate, so there was a whole big fight over how do you do it. But the other thing was we weren't able to say this is frivolous. This allegation is frivolous, and just move on. Everyone took just as much time, even the ones that seemed really silly or had no facts to back them up. So I learned from that the words and the processes really matter, and you cannot delude yourself that only good intentioned people will use those words. All right? I know that sounds kind of weird, but it's the worst case scenario, right? So that was the code of ethics, and that was the compensation policy. Now we kind of moved on, and I really felt for some members of our community, and once again, it's that blood quantum issue. I had a grandma come in whose grandchild was 1/64th shy of the 1/4 blood quantum. And this child is 14 years old, started in our Head Start, went to our school, knows the language, has participated in the culture, has just huge connections to his roots, but is not enrollable. But yet I have people who are a quarter who live in California, who've never stepped foot in the home community at all, who don't know their relatives, and they are enrollable by virtue of the blood quantum. Weird, right? And so I feel for this grandma. I also have nothing I can do to help her because that's what the Constitution says. So start talking to the Minnesota Chippewa tribe about not just Constitution reform, but specifically enrollment. And want to start having a way to have those conversations. Once again, it doesn't matter what I think, because it'll come down to one vote, but what I need to do is involve the citizenry, right? And what I wanted to be able to tell them about their decision was, what are the impacts of your decision? Because this woman that I talked to about her 1/64th shy grandchild, one of the things I told her is so many of us over at Fond du Lac have blood from other tribes. Maybe you should do some research and see if there's a blood in your family from one of the descendancy tribes. Maybe it's not going to be Fond du Lac, but at least it's identity. And she said, but he won't get per cap. And I said, if I change the blood quantum, nobody's getting per cap anyway. Right? And those are some of the choices that people are going to have to make when we start talking about blood quantum is what is important to us as a collective. Is it identity? Is it lineage? Is it culture? But I also need to be able to give you facts, because those things we're not going to have agreement on, but there are some facts I can help you with. Like, what does it mean if we go from a quarter to an eighth? What does it mean if we go to descendancy? What does it mean if we accept other Chippewa blood? I had a grandma who was Bad River. Her blood's not counted in my mother's blood quantum, and therefore not to me or my daughter. What happens if we accept other Chippewa blood, like Red Lake and the Wisconsin tribes, or in North Dakota and everywhere else we've met? Canadian. Brothers and sisters over the Canadian border, is there a way to accept their blood quantum? Or should it be any Indian? We have tons of enrollees who went on relocation and were part of urban Indian communities. My daughter's a Pecti. Should she be able to count that towards her blood quantum? So what we did is we hired a demographer, and we did some extensive surveying of our membership and asked them, tell us about you and your family. Are you married to a Native? Are your children enrolled? What is their blood quantum? Do they have other Indian blood? If so, from where? If so, do you know how much? And we started coming up with some population estimates. I don't agree with the population estimates. Hold on a second. Forgot to have my purse. I brought it. All right. Sorry for messing with your camera. I'm back. Sure, he's gonna get me with sweaty big hair. One of the, oops, sorry. I'm not really good with microphones. One of the things they said for Fond du Lac is if we were to go direct descendancy, they say that our blood quantum will only vary by about 2,000 people. We have 4,200 now. The math doesn't work for me of where they're starting with, because they are saying, they are using an error factor saying just because people can enroll doesn't mean they will. And God love her, she's a really smart woman, non-Indian, and she's a science person, right? And a statistician. She doesn't know how many calls our enrollment offices get every day claiming somebody who's, you know, a Chippewa princess, and so therefore, what can I get? What can I get is what my enrollment officer hears is, I heard my grandma was Indian, is what can I get? So I think they are vastly underestimating the number of people who could enroll and the fact that they will or won't. I think they will. If they think there is some advantage to it, from what I've heard over the per capita discussions and what motivates people's involvement, yes, if people know that they can get access to health care and service delivery, I think they will. I'm going to put this information, Minnesota Chippewa Tribe is going to put this information probably within 30 days on their website. So you can look at that, just Google Minnesota Chippewa Tribe and look at the numbers for yourself. This is going to take quite a lot of communication in our community. I want people to understand the implications. I run a housing waiting list. It seems like every time I put up another 20 units, within a year and a half, guess what? There's another 50 families that replace the 20 I took care of. I really worry about scarcity of resources and being able, especially as we make inroads, do you know what I mean? We've made inroads on health outcomes for our elders. They're living longer. Do you know what I mean? We're managing their diabetes. We're helping with their nutrition. You know, we're providing housing and other forms of assistance. it would have a serious impact on quality of life issues for the folks that are there now. And so the decision they need to make for themselves is, what is more important? Is it my grandchildren's identity, or is it around resource access? And then there's a whole school of thought that if you lower blood quantum, you're not necessarily a Native person anymore. There's a lot of people that feel like that anymore. It means you have lineage, but without having access to culture and heritage. Once again, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily promoting any of these notions, but these are some of the things that I've heard back. So where you can arm yourself with actual data and or fact scenarios to inform you, do that. Do your research. You know, don't go pluck my code of ethics off of our webpage because it's on there, and say, well, this is what Fond du Lac's doing, so maybe we should do something like that, or maybe you get something from Apache or Ho Chunk or wherever. It's worth that conversation and that research to actually say to them, and how's that working for you? Because if you thought that just because it was on my webpage that I think it's perfect, you may be missing a part of the story of how it actually works. And I don't know that there's a tribe out there that wouldn't talk to you if you ask them, I notice you have done this in your community. Can you tell me how that's working for you? What do you think is the pros? What do you think is the cons? What would you change if you could? Do you think this has added value to your community? So I know the young kids all the time, you know, I read it on the internet, it must be great, and it must be true. Don't fall into that pitfall. Talk to those, either that government or those citizens, and find out in actuality how it's working for them. So this is the first blush for us at the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. Unfortunately, while we're working on this hard part, White Earth has actually moved forward with constitutional reform all on their own. And they have actually developed their own constitution that is separate than the Minnesota Chippewa tribe. It's a direct descendancy, and it sets up a whole new governance system, unlike any of the other 5 bands. It was put to referendum, and it passed. That constitution is incompatible with the Minnesota Chippewa tribe's constitution as it is now. Because it has direct descendancy and this different governance structure, it no longer meshes with what we already have. So Irma Visner, who's the chairwoman there, asked if the Minnesota Chippewa tribe can somehow accommodate her constitution, and we can't. Partly because right now the Chippewa tribe constitution, we accept blood quantum from any of the tribes, and you have to have a parent enrolled in the band that you are enrolling with. Yes.
Some question, what is direct descendancy?
It means as long as you can trace
Any relative?
not any relative, a direct descendancy. So it has to be a parent, grandparent, great-grandparent. Yeah.
So if you had direct descendancy, say you're on this tribe, or you have direct descendancy to White Earth, are you able to,
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
it's White Earth only.
I mean, White Earth.
Wait, yeah, as long as,
My father and grandmother are from White Earth, but my grandmother, and my mother and grandmother are from here. That's why I was asking, would you be able to, like, would I be able to, if I wanted to go to your information? Or because I mean, my grandmother and my father passed away, but that was their reservation, White Earth.
so I am not the best person to ask about how they plan to implement their constitution, because I don't know the nuances of how they plan to do it. So I don't know if they have a web page. I know White Earth does, but I don't know if they have a specific constitution web page. But people were asked to vote on this constitution, so there's information out there, or you can call there. So if White Earth pulls away from the Minnesota Chippewa tribe, there's no way then for the other 5 bands to count the blood quantum from White Earth. We have some lands held in common that we'll have to figure out how to make sure the financial interests of the other 5 bands are taken care of with lands that we share within each of our borders. I have service delivery concerns. I have quite a number of White Earth band members that I serve with our pharmacy in the Twin Cities and with our Center for American Indian Resources in Duluth. And if they now have direct ascendancy and there's a huge uptick with more eligibility. We all know this, just because you have more people doesn't mean Indian Health Service is automatically going to give you more money. They don't give you enough for the pot you have now, right? So if our population grows real quick, real fast, I worry once again about those scarcity of resources. Interestingly enough, a couple observations from White Earth. I admire greatly that they took this on within their community, just like I admire citizens here if they want to be more active in looking at adapting their government processes. But one of the things I've heard from people who are from White Earth is they don't feel like enough people were involved in that decision making. That it was a very small group, that small group was consistently a small group, and that they made decisions that affected everybody. A part of the problem is it went to a vote. And at that point, the people who voted made that decision. So a very small group of voters made that decision for everybody because people didn't care enough to be engaged, either before the vote or when there was actually a chance to vote. Very low numbers. Well, what's happened, what I heard now is since their last election, there's a bit of a backlash brewing against the current administration because they undertook this effort of constitutional reform. And I feel really sad for that because you're a little late to the party. Your chance to get involved was numerous before the vote, and obviously a lot of people didn't participate in the vote, and now they're being detractors of the current governance when they chose not to be involved before that. And frankly, you know, I get shenanigans happen at my tribe. You guys probably hear too, from what I hear. We undermine our own credibility within our communities and outside of our communities when we're constantly fighting with each other and not resolving these issues in an appropriate way that really understands that people watch us. You know, as we've grown to be more economic players, as we've developed more partnerships, and as tribal governments become more visible, we're more relevant to more people. Maybe they don't get to vote in our elections, but I have 2,200 employees that are my stakeholders now too. You know, I have partnerships with other jurisdictions. I have relationships I have to manage, whether they're at the federal and state level or local level. And when our shenanigans are not held within the community, it undermines not only my credibility, but it seems to splash on other tribes as well. You know, look at those Indians, they don't know how to behave, they can't even figure out how to take care of themselves. So inclusion is the key here, and broad-based participation. I think it's worth it to take more time, and I don't know what the big hurry was at White Earth, but they seem to be really motivated by getting some decisions quickly, and I think because of that, they gave up a chance to have inclusion. And that's a lesson I learned from them, and this observation I share with you is, it would be better to take longer and have more of your community involved and work out some of these things within your community so that they're not controversial and people aren't saying they're not included and they're forced to act after the fact. Take the time. We did a 1.5-year-long strategic planning process at Fond du Lac in my second term. And I said that, you know, I feel like I'm the captain of a big ship, right? I've got the wheel and I make course corrections, but the community has to tell me what the destination is, right? And strategic planning helped me do that, but it took a 1.5 years. We reached out to our entire membership because we know who our membership is, right? We always know where they are. We went to them directly. We used our newspaper, we used public events, we had listening sessions, we had group meetings and open meetings, and that time ended up giving me more credibility as a leader when the results were done, because everybody knew that whether they participated or not, they at least had the chance. So when I make a decision and they say, what are you doing that for, Diver? I can say, because you told me so. And the strategic plan and this decision fits within that framework.
Sharon, if I may.
Sure.
A couple of questions.
grandma.
How did your tribe, did it really diagnose the position they're in because of the Bureau of Indian Affairs applying that way back when the Bureau became Bureau?
Absolutely.
The boiler
Mhm.
plate concept and versus what we have today here in West Waukene or elsewhere in any country out there that applies to following the rules of the white man again? Do we not take a look at, or has anybody within your reserve taken a look at, how did those old people do that?
Mhm.
Was the clan the most important process at the time of governance, if you want to call it that? And why do we allow people to put us in a pedigree situation where we're probably one of the only groups of people in America that has to identify exactly who we are, where we come from, and our blood quantum? Would that sort of piss you off, you know?
Yes. Yes, it pisses me off regularly. And do we all understand that the constitutions were a termination strategy? Absolutely. You know, I was teasing when I was out in the hallway with you and talking about finding out that my great-grandpa actually never knew he had a third son. We always knew he had two sons, and from that all the divers came and found out he left a son here. We never knew that. And this was whole new big information. And I was teasing them and I said, I don't know where all my relatives are. That's why I went Norwegian. Do you know? I mean, between my mom and my dad both being enrollees, oh hell, who knows, right? But the point being that because blood quantum, I was teasing some of the other tribal chairs in the Chippewa tribe talking about sending around the love bus. You know, call it snag weekend and send a bus around, you know. But the blood quantum is real. And for that grandma, I'll be right with you, okay? For that grandma who feels the pain of her grandchild being 164 short, I mean, I think of my own daughter. She's enrolled, but she doesn't live here. She lives in San Francisco, and she's actually lived all over the world. I don't know what her chances are of finding another Minnesota Chippewa tribe member, because you fall in love with the people you're around, right? And she's not here. So do I understand that it's a termination strategy? Yes, I do. Should you just amend what's there? No, you always have the option of throwing the whole damn thing out and starting from scratch. And what your scratch looks like may be very different than what Fond du Lac's scratch looks like. Maybe you want to return to some of those things. We used to have hereditary chiefs, and we don't anymore. It's been so long, and kind of that institutionalizing where this form of government is now normal for us. But one of the things the Harvard Project found out is any constitutional effort you do has to be legitimate in the eyes of your own citizenry. The fit has to be there. They call it cultural fit. So if you still have those vestiges of traditional leadership that have credibility in your community, then your best bet for doing constitutional reform would be reflective of your community's cultural traditions and values, because that will be most legitimate. If you take something more Western, it's even going to be more further removed from the heart and the traditions of your people, and it's going to be less legitimate than those things that just feel right here. Red Lake actually has, well, they have a constitution that's written on paper that's more Western. They have found a way informally to include their hereditary chiefs as, my word's not there, so don't bust my chops if they don't like the words I use. This is the way I've heard it, is kind of like an advisory capacity. And I don't mean that it's minimized. It's just not sanctioned through their constitution, but it's real to them. And they found out a way to make this hybrid informally to create that cultural fit. So don't think that everything you need to do, every I needs to be dotted and every T needs to be there. You just need to figure out the structure and something that feels good for your community. And the only way that's gonna happen is through that communication, right? So, the lady,
You're talking about diver, I'm a diver.
Yo,
The
come on.
one that lives here with my grandfather, his name is Adam Francis Diver.
okay. With the divers guy around. Be
Go
careful,
ahead, tell me about it.
be careful of the 76-year-old guy that I brought to your casino because he'd be flirting with all your women. My dad, I told him, Dad, be careful, they might be your great nieces. And the fact that my mother's there with them and they've been married 56 years. You don't mess with the moms.
Karen, I got a quick question.
Please.
I hear you talking about the participation and all the things that you did to try and garner, maybe support or be open, be transparent. Man, I tell you, we've had problems with that for years and years and years. Just an example is our last secretarial election here. We had 230 people that registered out of our 3,500 members or more, closing at 36 or whatever.
To run for
But,
office?
Yeah, we had
Holy.
230 registered, but only 113 showed up to vote at the polls that day. So we're having a problem. We went as far as trying to,
Engagement.
right, I mean, we went as far as giving out free plays here, and we didn't, you know, people would come just because of the free plays and not really take in the message. And I don't know, do you guys have any way that you can increase the participation or?
No, I actually wish there were more participation myself. We generally get 1,000-ish voters out of probably the 3,000 eligible. Maybe that's not the total though. 4,200 in total. I'm trying to figure out how many of those are under 18. You know, it's kind of hit and miss. Do you know what I mean? Because there's some people that are off reservation and they really don't always feel like they're engaged enough to make that decision, and they'll kind of think that it's better for them to leave it to the home community who's closer to it. You know, but then we have some of the off-reservation folks who say it's more important, it's just as important for me to be engaged because that is my home and community, and I talk to my relatives there, and I still have a citizenship obligation and right that I need to participate. You know, but the home community people, you know, they'll say, well, why should off-reservation people get the vote? You know what I mean? They shouldn't get that voice. Well, they're still citizens. And I don't ever want to create a situation where you only feel like you're a member and matter when I want something from you, but I also don't want you necessarily, I'm not ready for you all to come home either. I don't have enough of anything. I don't have enough jobs. I don't have enough housing. If you are happy where you are, you be a happy person wherever you need to be. That's the way I look at it. Do you know what I mean? I don't want to say, and what can I do to treat you as an equal citizen no matter where you are? It's almost like penalizing people for being victims of social policy through the years, you know, relocation and all of that. If you've made a good life, have a good life, you know. I don't know. All you can do is make the effort, but I'm not going to ever say that you need to have 100% citizen participation because that would be an unrealistic goal. But you at least want to be able to honestly say to yourself that the opportunity for involvement was there, whether people chose to take it or not. But you do have to, I think, set in your mind what is a critical mass that gives this legitimacy, right? Because White Earth obviously didn't need that critical mass, right? With 200 and some voters or 300, I'm not sure the exact number out of, 20,000 people. So you need to decide, how big is your tribe? Somebody said it and I don't remember. How big?
About 3,500.
3,500?
Catch it up, people.
Long winters, man, you might pass us up.
Cold ones here too.
I know, right? Wasn't it terrible?
There's too many babies, pushing baby strollers.
You know, if you could get it 30%, you're doing better than out there's elections. 25%. I mean, I guess I don't know what your magic number is, but the people you want to get to the people who are gonna have an opinion and be critical if they weren't included. And for those people who don't wanna engage, at some point they give up their right to be critical about it. If you're not part of the solution, then you're a part of the problem kind of thing. You know, we say that all the time about, you know, the presidential elections and, you know, senators and all of that, and it's true. You know, we push our own people to vote in regular elections for the outside community, but for some reason we don't always get to engage them internally. We've thought about that. We had monthly open meetings where our citizens can just kind of, you know, bring us their issues, and that's what they used to do. You know, they used to do the $5 coupons and all of that, and, you know, I won't do that. You come because you're interested and you want to participate in your government. I'm not going to buy your participation. I shouldn't have to buy your participation. I'll do cookies though, pretty regularly. What else? What else is on your mind?
I have a question, Madam Chair.
Sure. You can call me Karen.
Karen,
We're probably cousins. You can call me Karen.
your government, the tribal council as it operates now, is that a paid legislature, or is that do you have any compensation for the current government?
Yes. So we have 5 council members, 2 are at large, 3 are district representatives. It's split in, it's 4-year terms, but they're staggered. It is a full-time job. We have under our bylaws, the 2 at-large positions actually have job descriptions that they have to implement. So for me, the chair, not only am I the head of the government, but I operate like the CEO. So I'm the top of the administrative chain. And then our secretary treasurer is like the CFO. So he is responsible primarily for the financial and record-keeping functions. The 3 district representatives would act more like our legislative branch then, where their primary duties is acting as a board, my legislative body, making policy and procedure, but not necessarily having day-to-day managerial duties.
Mm-hmm.
And then citizen relations. It should be the first place that tribal citizens use for problem solving. Does that work in actuality? On a good day, yeah. On a bad day, no. You know, we're constantly kind of challenging ourselves as a reservation business committee, you know, with our tribal council who want to have a ton of managerial input. Do you know what I mean? Where we'll let that input go on for a while, and then it's my job as chair of the board. I don't vote on my reservation business committee, but I set the agenda and I implement that policy. You know, I'll let them vent for a little while before I say, management has heard your input and they'll get back to you with their decision. Sometimes that goes well and sometimes that does not, but that's the way it is. And it's my job to intervene wherever our tribal council feels like they can directly manage outside of the body. The staff knows to come to me and I will manage the board. They don't have to play those politics. One of the things that came through loud and clear to people who talk to me about what they expect me to do in my job is don't micromanage. And I tell them, well, nobody's supposed to micromanage, but you also be clear that when you say don't micromanage, that means for you and your kids and your sister and everybody else too. So don't think it's going to be different for you. It's not just over there. And so far I'm getting away with that okay. I'm getting cussed at every now and then,
Thank you.
but I'm going to get her and then I'll look back around, okay?
We've had it on one of our surveys that the tribal members would like to see the council members be in a paid position.
And I didn't say that. This is a paid position. It's a full, it's more than a full
But I mean,
job.
because some council members, mine is because they're retired, they have a job and then they also have that. And what I heard from people that were supporting that was that then they could take just that time to do work with all the things that are needed in the community, and it would be easier. People and the tribal members would be supporting that because there's always the talk, unfortunately, the negative part of being a tribal council member is all the money that you're getting. And this way, everybody would know, well, the 8 council members get this and the other 4 get this, and that'd be it. There would be no more negativity. They've taken all the money. If you were a council member, you'd be making all this money, and you could still have your job and make some more money. So I think, my thoughts is, I would support that, because then you would never have to hear that again. You would never have to hear the tree.
You would just hear something different, so I get.
But I mean, but it would end that problem.
Yeah,
I
so.
mean, it would, I think it would work. I mean, I don't know if it would, is ever gonna happen or.
Well, people think I make too much money. I make like $150,000 a year. I manage a workforce of 2,200 people as CEO. In the private sector, it would be a lot more than that. Plus, I have all my government relations stuff to do too.
It'd be $1 million or more.
Right, I mean, but I'm doing this because I consider myself a public servant, and I also came from the nonprofit sector, so, I mean, it's a big, big job, and it's time consuming. So the criticism will be there no matter what, because it will always be about what's there.
But it's
You'll always want something different
But it's
than what's
never been
there.
like that since I was driving through.
It's a big enough job. I don't know enough about your community, but tribal council is a big, big job, and I don't care what the size of your community are. You don't need to have as many employees as I have. You're actually taking the health and well-being of an entire nation and looking out how many generations, the needs in the community, the dreams of this community, and you're managing all of that. It's a big job.
But it could be changed. I mean, it could go back to the way it's right now and going into a job.
I can't imagine trying to do another job in this. I couldn't. Let's put it to you this way. I would do it if I had to, because even though I'm the chairwoman, I still have the mortgage, right, and bills to pay. I would not be as an effective of an elected leader if I had to manage paid expectations in addition to my public service. Public service is a vocation and
Good point.
an
Good
appointment.
point. Thank you.
I'm going to go look around, okay, and then I'll come to you and then just leave it. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if any of the Minnesota Chippewa tribes have other voting places to vote on issues regarding the vote of anyone that tribes. I know the Ho-Chunks in Wisconsin here have some voting places, like Illinois, where they're.
Like different polling places.
But does Minnesota do that?
Some of them do. Fond du Lac does not, because we allow absentee voting by mail.
You do? That's good. You do or you don't?
We do.
Right on.
So any voter has the ability to vote by mail. But I know that Leech Lake has an urban, I think they have a Twin Cities metro location. I think Red Lake puts in a Duluth location.
You'll see what this is.
Yeah, we just assume, those machines are expensive, and the personnel you have to deploy, and for us, it's more effective to do absentee voting by mail. But that's also quite expensive because we certify all of the ballots. The lesson to learn from us is the postal service is going belly up, and because certified mail gets handled differently, not by machines, it's taking too long. We almost are going to need to think about extending the period, because I think it's 6 weeks, like between the primary and the general, and that's almost not enough time to do certified mail out and get it back. Because they have to mail in a request first, then they get the ballot back certified. So I think we're going to have to, our next election, talk about whether or not people, to simplify the request process, like maybe be able to fax it or email it in, so that, but I would still want to certify mail the ballot itself, because you want to reduce fraud. So we do allow that. Yes.
Okay. I'm really glad you touched on all the things that you touched on. I want to know about the impact of self-governance and how that has kind of defined the roles of your CFO and how that's working for you.
Specifically the CFO, or are you interested in the CEO too?
I'm the chairman of Constitution. We've been kind of mandated to take a look at our budgetary process.
Mhm.
I've been trying to promote the idea of moving toward self-governance and best practices that tribes have gone under and how that's benefited their organization. Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Did everybody hear his question?
No.
He was asking me about self-governance and the impact on, or has it affected our financial regulatory process?
Yes.
Is that an okay way to put it?
That is excellent.
Okay. I'm not so sure necessarily it's about our self-governance. I think it's more building institutional capacity. Because certainly our secretary treasurer, it isn't like there's a minimum job qualification that they have to be an accountant. So I don't know that that position itself is what creates a decent structure, but I do know that financially, Fond du Lac is very capable. I mean, we'll always get audit findings because people haven't recertified at housing. Do you know what I mean? And that's, you know, you're out of compliance with the grant requirements. I mean, that one will never go away. But, you know, we don't have audit findings in terms of lack of internal controls and things like that. But we structurally have built a system where the academic and professional capabilities are there, and it's the secretary treasurer's job to make sure that we actually contract for an annual audit, that we get reviews regularly on our enterprises, you know, that the budgets are done on time, that the reports are coming to the tribal council on time. So the structures were put there to support anybody who is secretary treasurer, regardless of whether or not they have specific financial background or not. Now, does it help that you have someone with at least a minimal knowledge of accounting and financial management? Yes, because otherwise you don't know the right questions to ask. But there should be something there that survives no matter who's placed in the position, because you can't control who the voters pick, right? So every secretary treasurer that comes in, the institution itself will survive me and the secretary treasurer. So we do quarterly audits of all of our for-profit ventures, meaning we're keeping, outside auditors are coming in every 90 days. We spend a lot of money on watching our money. We do an annual outside audit, both of the government side and the corporate side. The monthly financial statements come to the whole tribal council and they get approved, actual approval. No tribal council member who's sitting with me will ever say they did not know what's going on. We all have a fiduciary duty, not just the secretary treasurer.
So the third-party auditors come in once a year. Do you vary with those? I mean,
We
do you
generally,
switch them?
we put it out for bid every 3 years. You don't ever want your auditors to become too cozy and too familiar with the staff. So those institutional things are things that'll happen regardless of who gets elected. I will spend a lot of time with new tribal council members when they're new. It's a part of what we'll do with them is sit down and help them understand the financial statements. More important, I shouldn't say more important, just as important as your financial statements though is your management letters. Your management letters will tell you where your processes are not to generally accepted accounting principles or to the standards that are required by your grantors. They'll tell you where you're failing to meet minimum controls. So the management letter is actually not the secretary treasurer's responsibility. That's where my role comes in because I have to adapt my management processes to make sure the institution is healthy enough to have good control over its finances, right? So if I see that the housing has items of non-compliance with their grant, that's a management problem, not a financial problem, and that tells me I need to get a plan from my housing director of how she plans to correct those things. How are you going to change your processes and your implementation so that we won't see this on there next time?
Okay, that tells me then that you have clearly defined the roles and responsibilities of your CEO and your CFO.
It's in our bylaws.
Those are on your webpage.
Yes, they are. They're not great, but it gives us what we need. All right? Sure. You know, watching the fiduciary duty, I mean, that's the duty of every board you have.
Young lady?
Yes, when you're talking about housing, all these places that are boarded up, they should be open now. There's a lot of people out there that are homeless, and there are a lot of people, I can understand, with the tribal council, that we don't want any drugs here, because when I was growing up, there was nothing ever like that. There was a lot of drinking, but no drugs or anything. And there shouldn't be anybody out there homeless. They should keep these houses ready to go in, and with the homeless that are coming in, there shouldn't be anybody out there without them.
You know what? This is not my community, so I don't necessarily know that I have an opinion about what's going on, but let me tell you about my community. I have a constant waiting list. Actually, one of my areas of expertise through my career is housing development and housing operation. And one of the special projects I worked on was bringing supportive housing to our community, which is multifamily housing that is for chronic and long-term homeless. One of the things that's important to understand is a lot of the people who are homeless are not homeless because they've lacked a home. It's because they have other issues that keep them from being stable and allowing them to keep their home. So supportive housing is, and one of the things that was frustrating for me as a community member and a staff member is, you keep giving folks a home to cure the homelessness, and it's like putting a Band-Aid on cancer. Until you get to the underlying reasons of why they're unstable, they will be homeless over and over. And we can't afford to keep rehabbing houses 20, 40, 60,000 because people who were not ready to be stable had housing and abused it.
Right.
And it's not fair to the good folks in your community who make their house payments and are trying hard and going to school and working, that they don't get a shot because somebody who's homeless keeps going to the top of the list. So we created a special solution for those folks called supportive housing. There's no time limit on how long you stay, and it's subsidized based on your income, but it gives you case management that stays in constant contact with everybody from school counselors. It encourages behavioral health. It's a bit non-judgmental because I'd say to you, what do you think are barriers to your stability, or what would you like to accomplish? And they work with you on developing your own plan and continue to encourage it. Does it fix everything? Is it some magic? No, because those issues are tough, right? Behavioral health issues, things like that. People, one of the things I tell folks in my community when we talk about chemical dependency is until we get serious about talking about mental health, we will never solve the drug problem. People used to drink because they were drowning their pain and self-anesthetizing themselves, but now they're using narcotics and it's killing them. And until we can say, I'm depressed, until we can say, I was abused as a child, until we can say all of those things that make us hurt here, we're gonna have homeless and we're gonna have drugs. So one of the things I've been actually promoting in Indian country is getting resources and services to those folks. There's 3 families in our supportive housing right now. They've been there 4 years in a row, and this is the only time in their children's life they have not changed schools every single year. 4 years in the same school. It didn't make mom sober, but their nutrition is better, their school attendance is better, the periods of use are decreased and are less deep and lengthy. So people aren't cured, but the self-harm they're doing starts to lessen with the support. So my answer to you is, you can challenge your community to look at different program models to meet the underlying need, rather than think that there's easy solutions that really are harder for your community and more expensive in the long run. We need to think about doing it different, not just doing more. All right. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
All right.
The issue, all those people should be drug tested.
Oh, the other thing I should probably tell you is, the number one thing that came out in my strategic plan was, there was actually 2 things that blew by everything. Number one was that I was to promote personal responsibility and self-sufficiency. And number two was promote and ensure the accessibility of language and culture. We had, in our community, there started to be some kind of incursion by gang activity. It wasn't full-fledged, but it was starting to take root. And there was some violence that was real scary. Nobody got hurt, thank God, it was a drive-by. We had a series of 5 community meetings, and everybody was saying to me, you need to do something. And to our tribal council, you need to do something. My answer to them was, I don't know where your kids are at night and your grandkids. What are you looking at me for?
Yeah.
You know? And when I said it like that, I had to, this is a community problem, and you can't push all your community problems off on a handful of people that you elect. You all need to own it. And through talking about it, one of what the solution we came up with is, if you are convicted of a violent felony or a drug distribution crime, because we don't want to criminalize chemical dependency. If you are convicted of drug distribution or a violent felony, you lose your housing. If you have been convicted of a felony, you are banned from our housing for 10 years from the date of release. There is no appeal to that. You have to wait 10 years. Now,
Really tough though.
well, all right, but let's be real honest with you, because, you know, that's not just, well, one of the things I said to the community is, oh, you're being all tough now, but what happens when it's your grandson? Then you're going to change your mind. And they were like, no, and you know what? We haven't gotten pushback for it until the last year or so. And I actually said this to somebody that, and actually it came from one of the community members of the audience, where people were complaining that when we do exclusions, if you're convicted of drug distribution or violence, you can be excluded from our community until you rehabilitate.
So you just don't use the word manage.
It's a banishment.
There you go.
Tribal members included, right?
Tribal member, and that's the difference for us, is we started doing it to tribal members. Now here's the other part of it. Let me make this point, hon. We act like this is a life sentence, yet 1/2 of my members don't live anywhere near the reservation, and they make it out just fine every day. It is not a life sentence to say you have to go to Duluth 20 miles away and get an apartment and a job there. What you're really saying to them is you're losing your subsidy, right? And your access to subsidized housing and subsidized services. But people in the whole world make it every day without tribal government taking care of them. The part that's sad is it's a lot more inconvenient to see grandma participate in family occasions. You brought harm into your community, and you have a price to pay, and you have something to prove that when you come back and you ask to come back, that you've learned to exhibit good behaviors that aren't harmful to your community. Now, you need to understand that we don't look at exclusions as a punishment. We look at it more as a giant order for protection for everybody else, because you have been found to be a danger to our community by bringing violence and drugs. Therefore, you are excluded as a way to protect the rest of us. So when people view it as a punishment, I have to remind them that their behavior was a danger to everybody else, and that they need to work on not being a danger anymore. That this is on you, that you brought sickness into our community, and you need to be responsible enough to change your behavior. We do let people back, but we expect them to show us that they've completed a level of education perhaps, or maintained employment, or finished treatment, got some behavioral health counseling, otherwise have invested in themselves to turn that leaf. And if they do that, we'll let them back. I'm gonna get the elder lady, okay? Okay, yes? Yeah, you.
Oh, I just wondering how long do you manage them? A few months, 2 years, 3 years?
Usually it's at least a year. But it'll be longer if they're still up to shenanigans. We'll check their background in that year, and if they've committed more offenses, that doesn't show that they're working on being better. They have to work on being better. All right, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is really good, and I recommend that we maybe can follow in some of those things. I know it's really hard here, because the one thing when I moved here, for my mom living here, that a lot of people are related, said you want to help them, but you don't want them to go to jail, you don't want them to be taken off the reservation, but I myself, you know, since I've lived here, it was more safer when I moved here in 1985 than now, because now they're breaking into homes. My neighbor, they came right into her house after her son left for work at 3 to the casino. They came in, she heard something, she got up, and like, what are you doing? And the one guy pushed her against the wall, and they got out. But I mean, at one time, I don't ever remember hearing that, so I'm really supportive of all what you're doing and what.
Well, you need to really understand though, this is not something I'm doing, I'm implementing it. This is something the community can.
Yeah.
Well, I just want you to understand, the community, this was something they asked their tribal council to do, and it's something they continue to support us. Now that we've been getting a little pushback, I've asked the tribal council, let's have some more of these public meetings and see if the public support is still there for doing this. There were some things, you know how I said, you know, it's not just what you write down that bites you in the butt, it's the things you forgot to write down, or the way people will interpret it. One of the things we're struggling with is, what about when they're minors, 16, 17 years old, and are distributing drugs or violent behavior? How do you kick a 16-year-old off of the reservation?
We're working on a detention center right now.
Well, sometimes they're in jail, so that removes that as an option. But the other part is, what if they are released to their parents? So we've done home confinement where they can be with their parents, but they're really not allowed kind of everywhere else, like the community centers and things like that. I will say this, we consistently make an exception for our clinic and our health services, because that's where they're going to access treatment, and we can't put a barrier to their wellness if they want to make those as a choice. I'm going to get this lady and then over there, okay?
Yeah, when you're talking about the background check, I think that's a good idea for our tribal council to do background checks on these people that are being kicked out of their places. You know, and the only place that they really get to go is to a relative. And then
you get overcrowding in that place. And
yeah.
Well, so if you're excluded, if you fall under the exclusion, you're not allowed to be anywhere on banned land. So that includes in somebody else's home that is on banned land.
Yeah, they're around here, that's
Everywhere.
That's it, everybody, you know, when you get kicked out, all you can do is go to your family.
I understand
And
though
then
that.
if you're not on their lease, then that person will get kicked out.
I will say this, exclusions falls firmly in one of the things that makes me most uncomfortable, but I also think is one of the most important. What we wanted to have happen is that it was a deterrent, and that people would find those consequences so great that they would think about it and consciously about what kind of citizen they wanted to be. And that has happened. I've had some young people who've gotten like in little kerfuffles, and the first question on Monday morning is, I got in trouble this weekend, Karen, am I going to get thrown out? You know, and so then I get to do the mother thing, and, you know, not yet, young man, but you're on a bad path. You know, so it's a hard thing though. I try not to hang on to some of this stuff because you need to be able to govern and not second guess yourself. Those are among the most difficult decisions. All right, I'm going to get this lady over here and come back.
Just wondering about your gaming commission.
My what?
Gaming commission. Do you guys
We don't have one.
don't have one?
The Reservation Business Committee acts as the management company in the gaming
The
commission.
reservation, is that the council?
That's the council, yeah.
Okay.
Just the way it is. It's come up upon occasion if we should have a separate gaming commission. And what my community says is, I don't want people that I don't elect making decisions about this whole community, because there should be accountability. And if you mess it up, Diver, I know how to get you out of there.
So is that the, like, I mean, with you having all the different positions, I mean, do you have your own housing?
We have 50 some divisions, different
No, I mean,
divisions.
housing authority.
We have, all of ours are advisory.
So you guys are basically all umbrella over everything.
Yep. I'm not going to tell you that's right, wrong, or appropriate. It's what I came into, and I mean, hopefully over time, we'll start engaging in some of
Glad
those
you made
things.
it
Huh?
here today. Glad you made it here today.
Yeah, it's some, there's often, I think it's kind of crazy.
Thank you.
Well, I know we only had you till 1, but I wanted to ask.
I don't know if you told me how long you had.
Oh, I didn't tell you, okay. So
They all
we could-
She's just sneaky.
Well, we only had you till 1, but maybe just a couple more questions, but I actually have a question specifically about exclusion
Yes.
management. How do you guys determine, what are some of the steps to determining
It gets
exclusion?
brought over as a recommendation by our chief of police based on their involvement in the situation. So here's the other thing, is it's not contingent upon state charges. Sometimes it could take weeks before there's charges, but they have to have committed felony level violence or drug distribution. And the reason we don't base it on whether or not there's state charges is because prosecutors for counties and cities could give a rat's butt.
Yes.
I was gonna say that, but. If I'm gonna have another ethics charge, I'd like it to not be. Sorry, I'm cracking myself up. They don't care about necessarily our health and safety, and if I have a drug distributor here and they can narc out and get them a bigger fish, they're gonna reduce their charges. But that doesn't mean that they are any less a danger to our community. They were getting their own people hooked and high and dead in some cases. So we don't tie it to the state charges because their motivation is different than ours. Ours is around public safety, and theirs is about the chain and distribution of drugs is important for them to stop, not the individual offender. So people will say that. They'll come back after it's all said and done, and they're like, well, they dropped it to a misdemeanor. I automatically should be able to come back. No, that doesn't mean you didn't do the bad thing. It just means somehow you talked your way into a lesser charge. That doesn't mean you weren't a danger.
Do you have a police commission?
We have a citizen review board.
And the police,
She asked me if there was a police commission. We have a citizen review board.
the chief of police can come to you with the recommendation, because our chief of police would recommend people every other week.
It has to be based on an actual offense.
Yeah.
An actual offense. Well, I heard you can raise a bit of a ruckus over there. That doesn't necessarily make you a danger to the community. Have I exhausted you all? I think we've gone a little bit beyond constitutional reform, and I apologize to that, but it's really a package of what is the authority you want to vest in your governance? Do you know what I mean? And the young lady back there talked about, is there a gaming commission? And at some point, do I think that that might be something that could be changed? Maybe. There's a part of me that it scares too, because is that going to be an elected position? Is it going to be an appointed position? How do you make them accountable to the citizenry? So I do get the fact that people always know where to find me, and they don't need to leave me in this job if they feel that I'm not behaving appropriately. And that's one of the hard things about delegating it to appointees, is I'm advocating some level of control, but yet still held accountable for that behavior. So if you can somehow institutionalize it, Mille Lacs has done it. They have a corporate commission that is separate than their tribal government. But I'm not sure, I don't know if it's independently elected or not, and some people have different formats, like they have an independent judiciary, they say, until something goes wrong, and geez, it doesn't seem so independent anymore, right? So implementation, once again, is more important than necessarily the words, because, once again, there's some tribes who have nothing written down and operate efficiently and openly and honestly and with the best of intentions. And there's the ones who've tied it all up in lots of lawyer words, and they still manage to argue with each other all the time and be highly dysfunctional. So, that goes to a bigger issue. It's all great to come to these meetings, but we need to get real serious about who we're electing to office. When I talked about Fond du Lac being a major employer, for God's sakes, They send us to Washington, they send us to negotiate with governors, we have to work out mutual aid agreements, and this is not entry-level employment, people. So until we start thinking really honestly about what the role is you expect your tribal government to be, I tell people honestly, I did not get elected to be your mother. So when you come to me with this whole host of interpersonal stuff, certainly I'll tell you what we have, but you have to understand that that's at the expense of managing and governing this personal service. But yet we still expect that as tribal people. We expect him to know everything that's happening in our families and to have a solution for it. And I'm not so sure that that's appropriate. You know, I think it's more appropriate for the district reps who don't have defined duties. But we need to think about who we're electing to these offices. We're not little operations anymore. And you are expecting us to take care of a ton of service delivery, a ton of businesses, but yet we continue to elect people based on who we know, who we're related to, and then expect them to be good at it. Now, I'm not saying you need a fancy education. I am not saying that. Some of the smartest people I know are people who have an abundance of common sense and life experience. But you also need to hear from those people that they could take those experiences and that common sense and translate that into governmental action and managerial ability. Because then once you get into office, people are so worried about keeping what they perceive as power that they forget they have to govern and manage. So I don't care what you do on paper, it starts with the ballot you cast every single election and the butts you put in those chairs and the reason why they're running. If they are running because they think that there's power and control, look at what that does to us. I would honestly want people there who are just willing to work hard and think equally and about the good of the whole over the good of the few. You want the leader who's not going to prioritize his kids and his grandkids and his nieces and nephews, who's going to think about your tribe as a whole. Do you know what I mean? And just work hard. So if you want to have true governmental reform, it doesn't start with paper, it starts with people. And how do we get good people to ever run when we make their lives hell once they get there? I mean, you know, God love you, you're thanking me for coming here, but you want to know why I'm here? This job wears me out. And when I heard that there were people that were interested in making their government better, if there's even a teeny bit I can do to encourage you to be involved in your government and be a participant, an active participant for the better, I'll drive anywhere to have that conversation because this stuff burns you out. So if you want to be a good citizen and have good governance, you need more people in the room, and you need some personal responsibility on the part of each one of you within your leadership. You don't have to be a big fish. It could be at your own dinner table where you challenge your own family about the ballots they're checking. Why on earth would you want him? He's a crook and you know it. Or he won't be a good leader. Or he won't be a good problem solver. Or he's a troublemaker. Just because they're loud doesn't make people right. And we have lots of loud people in Indian country. That doesn't make them a leader. It makes them somebody with a loud voice. Listen to what they're saying, people. So if that's the thing I can leave you with, that's the thing.
Thank you. 120.
I love everybody. Maybe I'll be transferring. Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
Mike, can you ask everyone if we want to take a group picture? Whoever wants to be included in that, want to take a group picture, make a quick announcement?
We're gonna take a group photo here for if everybody wants to get together and where do you want us right up here?
Anywhere.
Okay.
Yep.
We should take it back. Yeah, back here.
Try not to walk in front of your recording.
No, it's fine.